Good morning, everyone. Welcome to 55 minutes of current and relevant business conversations. That's what we do on Business Morning. I'm Ini John Mekwa, and normally we start from the global space. Well, after Liberation Day in the US yesterday, you can just know that everything will be connected to tariffs, beginning with oil. It dropped $2 whole on Thursday after President Donald Trump announced that reciprocal tariffs on trading partners, stoking concerns that a global trade war may dampen demand for crude. So we see a whole $1.97, almost $2 shed off Brent. That's about 2.63% to $72.98 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures also lost almost $2, and that's 2.76% to stop at $69.73. We hope we'll see a bit of recovery. President Trump had already announced April 2 as the day of liberation for the U.S., bringing new duties that could overturn global trade system. And we had the details from him yesterday. So both benchmarks have settled higher in the previous session, but turned negative over the course of Trump's press conference yesterday afternoon in the U.S., evening or night right here, 9 p.m. He announced a 10% baseline tariff on all imports into the United States and higher duties on dozens of countries' biggest trading partners. Imports of oil, gas, and refined products were exempted from the U.S. president's sweeping new tariffs, according to White House. And Trump's tariff policies could stoke inflation, slow economic growth, intensify trade disputes, and possibilities have weighed down on oil prices, reinforcing bearish sentiment. According to Energy Information Administration data, it shows that U.S. crude inventories rose by a surprisingly large 6.2 million barrels last week against analysts' forecast of a decline of 2.1 barrels. Now, still in the oil space, and you would have noticed in the different parts of the country, there's been an increase in the pump price. And we have been carrying you along on the issue of the Naira for crude. Well, it seems that talk of renewal did not go through. So now we see there's a new price from the NNPCL to major marketers, going to about 925 Naira for a litre at major filling stations in Lagos, while in Abuja is about 950 Naira for a litre in Abuja. The new prices increase, which takes effect started yesterday, marks about 65 Naira increase from the previous price of 860 Naira in Lagos and 70 Naira higher than 880 previously charged in the northern part of the country. Industry experts in the oil sector attribute this new price to Dangote Refinery's refusal to continue selling petrol products in Naira, as we know that is closely linked to the possibility of renewal of the crude for Naira, which Dangote Refinery has been depending on to reduce price at the pump. Now, yesterday, you may have seen that story that there's going to be a new notes in the country. Well, the central bank has denied that viral social media report, claiming that it has introduced two new denominations of 5,000 and 10,000 Naira notes for circulation from the first day of May. The financial market regulator made the clarification in a notice via its handle, and they did share statements also. The viral circular, which was falsely attributed to the CBN and widely shared on WhatsApp, has stated that the Apex Bank had planned introduction of two new denominations as part of ongoing efforts to streamline cash transactions and improve liquidity management. That is a false story. According to the CBN, there's nothing like that. The chairman of the Senate Committee on Capital Markets, Senator Osita Izunaso, has cautioned that the era of fraudulent investment schemes and market manipulation is over, as the Securities and Exchange Commission will now properly regulate cryptocurrency trading, among other activities. Was speaking at a media conference. He underscores that the new law assented to by the President Bola Tinubu, has introduced regulatory measures aimed at strengthening Nigeria's financial system, particularly in the cryptocurrency, capital market sectors, and state government funding. He warns that promoters and operators of illegal financial schemes will face severe penalties, including fines of at least 20 million naira and imprisonment of up to 10 years or both.
Before now, people can try Ponzi and they will not be caught and they will not be arrested. Today, if you try Ponzi, you'll be caught, you'll be arrested, because it is digital asset. You can't do Ponzi without passing through the internet and all the rest of them. So you'll be caught. And the whole essence of it is to protect people's money. We are saying that apart from the fine, the person also risks going to jail for 10 years, apart from paying the fine. So you can't even say that you pay the fine and you go free. You will still pay the fine and go to jail. That is what the law is talking about. You know, before now, subnationals like the states and local governments do not approach capital market for long-term funding. But with this new law, states and its agencies and local government can approach capital market for long-term funding. Instead of relying on federation accounts and commercial borrowing, you can now go to the capital market for long-term funding for your state. In fact, of all the 774 local governments in Nigeria, it's only one local government, Lagos Island, that have approached the capital market for funding. So what are the other local governments doing? What are the states doing? So we have now made it more flexible. This law have made it more flexible. Before, you can say it wasn't flexible for them, but now it's very flexible. Every state that wants to approach the capital market now can go to SEC and get the approval and get long-term funding for infrastructural development in the state.
So it's predictable that a lot of conversations today will be on the tariff after Liberation Day yesterday. And of course, we'll see how it will affect Nigeria and Africa. But before that, let's deal with some domestic issues. We have the Executive Governor of Lagos State, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, joining us on the program this morning. I know if you live in Lagos, yesterday you had anything to do with the island, you would have had a terrible experience. So our governor is here to explain some of that for us. Good morning, Your Excellency, and welcome to the program.
Independence Bridge today is one of the oldest bridges in the country. You know, if we put it to date, I'm sure you go and check it, is maybe almost 80, 90 years old. Independence Bridge, which connects, you know, Victoria Island from the Bonny Camp into the marina side of Lagos Island. And it's been the oldest in this entire corridor. But what has happened is this approach end from Victoria Island going into Marina has been under severe threat. You know, so what builders had done over the past couple of years first was to stabilize, you know, beneath, which we can't see. They've done a whole lot of sheet piling underneath the bridge to protect and to hold the integrity, you know, this wall. But the real job is that there's like a 15 to 20 meters, you know, span on the bridge, which is sitting on nothing. You know, over the years, erosion has gone underneath and is sitting on nothing. So that is indeed an engineering disaster that is just waiting to happen. One day, God forbid, if the part of the bridge just collapses, it will take you right into the water. So they've been on this conversation on what is the best time for us to move in and solve this problem once and for all. You know, so that's it. But as a government, we must be able to take responsibility. And the responsibility is that maybe we did not communicate long enough. We did not communicate adequately enough to tell our citizens that from Monday, you know, Tuesday, 2 days ago, that this bridge was going to be open. One side of it, actually, it's not the entire bridge. It's the one from Victoria Island to Marina that was going to be closed for 5 to 6 weeks. You know, and so that is a responsibility that I'm leading to take charge. You know, now. So what we are now, you know, explaining to our citizens, this thing, given what they've done in the past 2 days, in my view, and from engineering conversation, makes it difficult to reverse it. They've actually excavated, the subsoil and everything, and we're beginning to see water underneath. So one of the things that we're going to see very quickly is that they're going to advance the work very quickly. They'll probably be working into the night, and to see how they can reduce the timeline from the 6-7 weeks that they are planned to about 4 to 5 weeks. It's engineering. They are going to need to do, what they call piling. They have to do, it's like a decompile, but it's a short span. It's like a decompile that has to sit also on the concrete. If they don't do it and let it cure well, it will also be an engineering failure. So in terms of length of time, in terms of the strength of the material they need to do, it has to also work and wait for all of that to happen. But the commitment which the management of Buildwell is telling us is that they will even work longer hours, they work quicker, and they have everything, to make it happen. But you cannot go into concrete mixing if you don't excavate. You cannot mix, you cannot do design if you don't have proper, measurement and the rest of it. So, so what I've also seen here is that they are committed to ensuring that they can bring that solution once and for all, into taking us out of a future or a possible disaster. But taking this forward, what are the solutions or what are the remedies that we can begin to put in? So it's really just around patience, and we observing the road furnitures and observing, the traffic officers and the security operatives that are going to be doubling, and in all of the nooks and crannies of Lagos. So part of the things that you see us that we're going to clean up the entire, Obalende axis. People can now have alternatives going towards Obalende, going towards Kefi, going towards off Awolowo Road to St. Finbar's Road, and ensuring that all of those other axes are free. There are no parking, there are no double parking on the road. Danfos and Kekemaro and all of that usually take, one way are completely off it. Even right from the AIG Zone 2, office around Onikon here, all of these places have to be cleared and free of traffic movement. If we can do all of that, it will not solve all the problem, but at least it will give alternatives, better and quicker alternatives for movement of traffic in and around Victoria Land and Ikoyi, which is the part, that we're needed to deal with here. Like I said, it was a case of we all rushing out yesterday after a very long holiday, after a very long weekend for 4 or 5 days. People needed to get to work immediately. People needed to get back to school, and businesses needed to start, and this part of the city is like what we call the CBD, which is the business district. And so because of the inadequate communication, and I will take responsibility, ineffective communication because it had started even before then, so you just assume that people are aware. No. You have to continue. Communication is enforcement. You have to continue before, people now make alternative plans to be able to use other routes and other, corridors, out of it. And so one of the things that I will also be advising a lot of our citizens is that this kind of thing has also happened, in another form. Let's think out of the box. Let us now know that if you don't have a business to do in Victoria Land in the next 2 to 3 weeks, conduct your business via social media, via telephone, via meetings, Zoom meetings and online meetings, and plan ahead, so that if you don't need to come and visit somebody here, please, you don't have to come, right? If you don't have a meeting that you must, ensure that it needs your physical presence, think out of the box. It was something similar that we have had during COVID, where you can have restricted movement in some part of the area for just, a couple of weeks, and be able to plan your journey time and be able to, see what are the alternatives, you can bring about, ensure that you can communicate, you can do, work from home, work remotely, just to ease, the traffic and just to ease all of us coming out. If you don't need to come out at 7 o'clock, wait till 10 o'clock. Let the people that need to come out at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, let them come out. You defer your time 2-3 hours, so they can see that even the approach from Marina to Victoria Land is free. There's no, on the counter on this bridge, there's no movement at all. We're also thinking of another alternative. Can we do a counter flow from here, we're looking at that, but it also needs a lot of excavation. We are going to break a lot of things, and we don't know if that also will be fully effective, but we will consider that in the next 1 or 2 days and see the effect of a counter flow, using all of the traffic information that we currently have. So one of the things that I want to assure is that you are going to see a lot of last mile officers, on the road. We are going to see a double number of last mile officers on the road. We're calling them from other parts of the city so that they can make presence here. And like what we did in November, December, they worked till very late, at night. Yesterday, I think it was because it was heavy rain around 11, 12 o'clock. That's why they were off the road. But we'll ensure that, since some of the rains are back also, that they can walk till very late into the early hours of the morning and ensure that, people get home, go home safely, and to also appeal to our citizens that it's not the time for you now to start driving recklessly, to start driving against, traffic direction in one way. And these are some of the little things that patience, could help us solve, and so whilst we take the responsibility that, fine, this has happened, we needed to do this, our citizens also have the responsibility to ensure that they plan and they obey, traffic management, and all of the signs and signals that we have. So I will stop here and let you ask 1 or 2 other questions just for clarity and clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the governor of Lagos State, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, there at the Independence Bridge. If you had anything to do on the island of Lagos yesterday, you would know what he's talking about. It wasn't a very pleasant experience, and it's because of that closure of the Independence Bridge. The governor is right there. That was live from the scene of the construction and rehabilitation, which is ongoing. And he says it will last for about 4 to 5 weeks. Hopefully, they'll be able to cut down on that time, assuring Lagosians there and asking for patience and cooperation. Road users, if you do not have to be on the island, please do not go there. So let's head back to business now, switch up the business mood, and then the first thing that pops up, of course, is the tariff of Liberation Day yesterday by U.S. President Donald Trump. Announcement of various tariffs that we saw, the list being 10%. I think Nigeria falls in the category of 14%. So let's find out how this is going to affect us in the coming days with the Chief Executive Officer of Carrier Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Mr. Chukwu, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Idni. Thank you for having me.
So yesterday, 9 p.m., everybody was looking the way of the White House. President Trump called it Liberation Day. But how do you see the spillover of these tariffs? We know China is the biggest hit, but we also have ours as the African countries and all that. Although we're supposed to have AGOA to protect us, but it doesn't seem that will protect us at this time. How much impact do you see this tariff affecting Nigeria and Africa?
Let me sum up with an article I'm trying to put together on this tariff, and that article is titled Donald Trump's Tariff, A New Beginning or Beginning of an End. And I think the tariff as it stands today will eventually signpost the beginning of the failing of U.S. or the collapse of U.S. as a leading economic and world power. The simple reason is this. For the first time in the history of the U.S., is picking up fight with even its closest enemies. If you look at that tariff, for instance, you mentioned the tariff on Nigeria, which is inconsequential because Nigeria is a net importer from the U.S., not a net exporter from the U.S. Nigeria's import from the U.S. in the last quarter of last year was about 6.36% of our total import, about 1 trillion naira. But how much does the U.S. currently import from Nigeria? It has actually diminished at a significant level. But back to the aspect I'm relating to, which is the core of your question. The U.S. tariff will eventually hurt U.S. and hurt international trade and hurt the friendly countries. Take, for instance, the imposition of tariff, 20% tariff on European Union. European Union is the closest economic ally of the U.S. It also imposed a 24% tariff on South Korea, one of its closest economic allies, and on Japan, and 25% on South Korea. These are countries that the U.S. have had very close formal economic relationship with. In addition to that, of course, China, we cannot always explain China's case because China is a trade deficit with the U.S. is humongous. I mean, in favor of China. But the 54% tariff on China, and you can be rest assured that these countries are going to retaliate. Of course, there are already statements by world leaders that they are going to reciprocate the reciprocal tariff, because that's what the U.S. president called it, reciprocal tariff. They are going to reciprocate in kind the reciprocal tariffs. So we're going to see a situation where price levels are going to go up in U.S., inflation is going to go up in U.S., possibly unemployment could actually go up, and the intended purpose of driving back manufacturing into the U.S. as well as generating revenue will be defeated.
Encourage domestic manufacturing in the U.S.?
Come again.
I said, don't you think this will also incentivize domestic manufacturing for the United States?
Yeah, you know, the truth about businessmen, they are not driven by threats. Businessmen are going to be driven by core economic factors. The first thing that will happen is that the U.S. is going to constrain import of raw materials. Of course, I know there are some exceptions they granted for products they believe they don't produce. So but ultimately, they're going to, because other countries will also impose reciprocal tariffs. So they're going to constrain import of raw materials that are critical to manufacturing. Today, they've driven away labor from Mexico, from other neighboring countries, from other countries that we are providing cheap labor in the U.S. Labor costs are going to go up in the U.S. And at the same time, price of imported goods, as well as even locally manufactured goods that tariffs have imposed on their input materials, will go up. So households in America will find it difficult to consume the same quantity of goods and services they used to consume, which means you're going to see a decline in consumption. If you see a decline in consumption, manufacturers will not have any incentive to improve manufacturing. Likewise, companies that are currently manufacturing outside the U.S. will rather intensify their manufacturing activities and sell to markets outside of the U.S. U.S. GDP is about $25 to $27 trillion. China is in the region of $17 trillion. By the time you add India, add European Union, add Japan, and all these countries are going to start trading among themselves, excluding U.S. or ignoring U.S. So the economic size of that global trade, excluding the U.S., is significant that manufacturers would rather stay in Mexico, in the European Union, in India, in Vietnam, in China, and possibly, if we make ourselves attractive, in Nigeria, and produce for the rest of the world and ignore America. And that's why I said in my article that I'm putting together, is this Donald Trump tariff, is it a beginning of a new era, like he said, that this Liberation Day, or is it a beginning, is it beginning of a new era or beginning of an end? So I think this will signpost the end of the U.S. economic hegemony.
Well, time will tell, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Thank you so much. But just before we let you go, let's see our Naira. We're just starting a new quarter. How the Naira fared in the first quarter. So I know that in January, for January 2025, the Naira closed at about 1,475 for a dollar, marking its strongest performance since June 2024. In February, there was about an 8.5% gain. I remember it was in February we had a convergence between the parallel and the official markets, a beautiful thing that we hardly have. So it closed about 1,500 in February. In March, the central bank is saying that the Naira ended the month around 1,536 Naira 82 kobo, marking a loss, a drop of 37 Naira 84 kobo compared to what it started with at the beginning of March. Remember, in 2024, the Naira was termed one of the worst performing currencies in the world. When we look at the performance in the first quarter, Mr. Johnson, would you say we are out of the woods, at least in the area of stability in value?
Well, I think it would be hasty to say we're out of the wood. What I would say is that the central bank is doing a relatively good job in managing the exchange rates, in maintaining some level of stability within a bracket of 1,490 to 1,550 Naira to a dollar. That has, they've been able to sustain that over the past 3 months. And what have they done? Because you have to look at what tools are available at their disposal. I think the most effective tool at their disposal is the use of treasury bills and more instruments to manage the foreign exchange demand as well as manage foreign portfolio inflows. And they have done that effectively well. So, but there are still too many variables out there that could weaken or constrain the ability of the central bank to manage the FX. One of which is the budget deficit. Depending on the size of the budget deficit, I think the federal government has budgeted about 13 trillion naira the budget deficit. But last year, they budgeted about 8 trillion naira budget deficit and ended up with about 12 trillion naira budget deficit. That is almost 50%, about almost 50% variance, negative variance. So, and as you start today, the government has a budget, a trade revenue that look optimistic, extremely optimistic. So we may see another situation where the budget deficit could widen beyond what they had projected, and that will put pressure on the ability of the central bank to manage the FX. And that factor that could constrain the central bank is oil prices and oil production. If oil prices drop precipitously or crude production drop materially, then the central bank's war chest or capacity to manage the exchange rate will be constrained. But all the same, the central bank has done a relatively good job. We've seen, like I said, we've seen some level of stability in exchange rates, and I hope that they will be able to maintain that, and there won't be any counterbalancing effort by a measure or policy by the fiscal authorities that will erode the effectiveness of what the central bank has done in managing the FX rate.
So you think at this rate, because, for instance, I think one of the applaudable efforts of the CBN is the EFM, the Electronic Foreign Exchange Market System. A lot of people have applauded that it's brought transparency to the system and improved sentiment, positive sentiment. Would you say that if we continue at the trend, the rate we are, do you see any addition to the value, or we should just accept that this is the new value of the naira and perhaps just find ways to maintain it?
Like I said, today, our external factor of the external factors of the economy may not sustain or support a materially stronger naira. Because one, you have to look at your export earnings and you look at your import earnings. In the last quarter of last year, total export was about 20 trillion naira. Import was about 15.6 trillion naira, giving us a positive trade balance of just about 3 trillion naira. But beyond that, you also know that there are other obligations inherent in foreign exchanges. Of course, the central bank said yesterday or 2 days ago that our net foreign exchange reserve is about 23 billion naira, which looks good. But beyond that, what matters is your inflow and outflow. And your inflow is driven largely by your trade, your export. Today, our major export remains crude oil. And that crude oil export could come under severe pressure. I understand OPEC can reduce our production OPEC quota, but that's not actually a major constraint for us. Our greatest constraint is our ability to produce crude, maintain some level of stability in the crude producing regions of the Niger Delta, and continue to pump out crude, as well as encourage investment that will increase our crude production. But the factor that's outside our control is the crude price. With what Donald Trump has done with a new tariff order, we're likely going to see material decline in global production, which will mean that there will also be decline in input demand. And our crude is one of the inputs that drive economic activities. So if there's a slowdown in economic activity, you may see a slowdown in crude demand, which could lead to a precipitous decline in crude prices. That will constrain the central bank's ability to manage the exchange rate at current levels. But all things being equal, assuming all things are equal, I guess we should expect Cowray's projection of exchange rate is between 1,450 naira to $1 to 1,650 naira to $1 for this current fiscal year.
So would that be your outlook for the second quarter? Was that a longer term?
Yes, that's the outlook for the entire year. And I think those are outlooks. The outlook remains the same, 1,450 to a dollar to between 1,450 naira to a dollar and 1,650 naira to a dollar. That's our outlook for the second quarter of this year as well. All things being equal, I keep emphasizing all things being equal. Variables could change very quickly. We just mentioned at the earlier part of this program that crude price dropped in a single day by $2. And I think that drop will continue for the rest of today.
All right, thank you so much, Group CEO of Tariffs Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu.
Thank you for having me.
Well, closely related to that is what's going on in the commodities space, and we have Senior Associate with Financial Derivatives Company, Dumebi Oluwole. Hi, Dumebi. I'm sure you were expecting, I think I heard you have a fly in the White House that listens to President Trump and tells you what he's going to tell us. So yesterday didn't come as a shocker to you with all of the tariff announcements and all of that. So now we have to deal with the consequences. But we had Mr. Johnson there say that, I mean, how many things do we actually export to the United States? So 10, 14%, 25%, it might not really affect us a whole lot. But what it has done to oil may affect us. We saw oil losing almost 2% just like that. And that, of course, is going to have an impact on us.
Yes, that's very, very correct. And even apart from what it will do to the commodities market space and oil specifically, also looking at other commodities like grains, where we look at wheat prices, look at corn prices, commodities that Nigeria actively imports. And what that means is that with the uncertainties that we're seeing those commodity prices actually increase. And what that means is that our import bill would likely increase as well, meaning that commodity prices in domestic markets would also likely increase based off of that. The other aspect of it, looking at in terms of our trading partners, that there are other trading partners that Nigeria is exposed to that are also in the face of this tariff.
I think top of the list is China.
Top of the list is China, definitely. So with the back and forth between the US and China, possibly sluggish demand, and how China would obviously, and how that would impact, other trading partners that China is exposed to, it just simply means that Nigeria could be caught somewhat in between. And not only Nigeria specifically, there are other African countries that will be exposed to this. Case in point, Egypt and Morocco. Morocco is currently facing tariffs from the EU based off of some of its associations with this automobile market, where China actively plays. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all thing. It's going to be spread across. So Nigeria, alongside other frontier markets that are exposed to some of these trading partners, with the EU as well now, will definitely be hard hit because of this tariff and, like a global trade war that we're seeing coming up.
Yeah, real global trade war. And, talking about the oil, we have new pump price.
Yes.
Is this as a result of we couldn't get an extension to the crude for Naira policy?
I mean, the last time I came, I did say that we're definitely going to see, that have an impact in, have an impact on pump petrol price. More importantly, is the fact that, like I mentioned like I mentioned the last time, is that we're now highly exposed to the changes in global oil prices. Changes in global oil prices will now be the determining factor of how domestic petrol prices will trend going forward. And that's simply because now we're operating in a completely different market structure. And what that means is that the higher the price of the raw material, the higher the price of the finished product. And that's simply the case right now for Nigeria. There is the lag effect where if we see global oil prices maybe decline or increase, it might take a while for it to completely reflect in the domestic market, but it will surely reflect. And that's currently what we're facing right now.
And with this now, we saw a positive PMI, 54.3.
Yes.
This might be a threat to it because when there's I think one of the driving factors of the PMI positive was the cost of operation. It reduced. So it encouraged more production. Now with this, that's a threat.
Yes, you're very right in that this is a possible risk to that. More importantly is when you look at the companies or the sectors that are actually covered with the PMI, you realize that they're primarily private sector businesses, but more importantly, you also consider the sectors that they're operating in. So we look at manufacturing, trade, agriculture, and then you also look at the size of those companies, and they're pretty much small to medium scale enterprises, and they are definitely highly exposed to some of these shocks that we're seeing and threats. So that's why this is a very potent risk for them. But when you look at the other aspect of things that also impact their production cost, you look at the fact that the Naira as well is a major determining factor as to how fast they will be able to produce or how stable their production would even be. And because of some of the positives that we're seeing with the Naira, we do think that there might be a mitigating impact of the Naira being stable on how much increase in petrol prices or diesel prices will impact their general operating costs, because we have seen that the correlation between changes in the Naira are more direct or a lot more than the increase in petrol prices on operating costs for businesses, and how that quickly translates to higher commodity prices for the consumer.
Yeah, but talking about the pump price now, can't the element of competition help consumers in this case?
I mean, we have seen that somewhat, at the beginning of the year, where there was some level of competitiveness. We saw that between the MRS that was, purchasing from Dangote and maybe Mobile, you find that the price was quite different. You see long queues at MRS filling stations, compared to maybe the NNPC or even a Mobile or a Total. And I would say that right now, because almost the two key suppliers, right, to all the other retail marketers are almost selling at the same price, the chances of that market competitiveness, being there or reflecting in the price right now is quite slim. The only difference that we would experience is if the price difference is very stark, and that's why I made reference to what had happened at the beginning of the year, and that's when consumers realize, oh, they do have a choice to say, okay, I can buy here is cheaper, or I'd rather buy from here because it's closer to me, right? But right now the choices are still slim, right? If you're getting at 9:30 and you have to journey for almost 40 minutes to get at 9:30, when you can journey for 10 minutes to get at 9:35, it's almost the same, and the consumers would make that rational choice to go for what is closer and more convenient to them.
But do you see anything that could lead to perhaps resuscitation of the crude for Naira? We're expecting more refineries from the government. Perhaps this would give consumers more options, to also have different prices.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't think it is dead and gone. I think it's a conversation that will remain ongoing till an eventual compromise or decision is made. We have seen changes with the NNPC board. It is very possible that based off of the new caliber of individuals that we now have within the NNPC, it's very possible that they would obviously want to optimize for profitability and optimize for wanting to sell as much to the Nigerian public, ensuring that prices are stable, there's enough supply. So I do think that those conversations with the Dangote refinery would likely happen, and happen on a more business-friendly environment, with the consideration that they want to obviously increase supply, increase profitability, and ensure that the people have as much, refined products as possible. On the government side, where we're already seeing some of these refineries, resuscitating, the expectation is that with the private sector-led growth, we're beginning to see an investment approach towards economic growth. We do expect that some of those refineries will definitely continue their operation. By how much that operation will increase in the end of the year to ensure that supply is stable is what we cannot really say now, but we do expect that those conversations will keep happening, and those outputs would keep increasing.
And we hope that the new NNPC leadership will take us to the stock market. We've been looking forward to having the NNPC at the capital market for a bit. And that question still remains unanswered.
I mean, we'll obviously have to just wait and see. They're just about to start their operations, basically. But what we have seen so far is that the new the new board, the people that make up the new board, with their qualifications, with the fact that they do have experience, and
from
they
the
are
private sector.
From the private sector, that has to some extent instilled confidence in the Nigerian oil sector, and this is now coinciding with some of the reforms that we've already seen happening in the upstream side of the oil sector, and now we're seeing this happening on the downstream side. So we're already seeing like some positive sentiments from investors towards Nigeria's oil and gas sector. The expectation is that, or the hope is that this will likely continue. And again, remember the core of the entire reforms towards the oil and gas sector is to encourage investment. The complaint over the years had had been that underinvestment had been a plague towards oil and gas sector. So with everything we're seeing now, the expectation is that we should begin to see a bit more increase in investments towards that sector, primarily from private capital. And if that continues, it means that we will definitely see more influx towards that sector. And whether we like it or not, the oil sector is still a major driver of economic growth and revenue for Nigeria. And if that is the case, we should begin to see some positive aspects in terms of oil revenue, oil receipts, and how that would definitely impact things like FAC revenue, foreign reserves, and the general macroeconomic landscape.
And this, at the end of the day, is going to also affect how much I use for my food. Talking about domestic commodities, yes. And I wonder where they are now, the prices.
I mean, so it's still pretty much mixed, but the general tone is that consumers are definitely still reeling from high prices.
So which might get even higher now because petrol prices are higher, fits
yes.
into transport mostly,
Exactly. So the pain for the consumer is not gone. It's still pretty much there. However, we do think that consumers right now in Nigeria are getting more acclimatized to the changes in commodity prices, so that we've seen more adaptive measures in terms of maybe buying in smaller quantity or buying in bulk. At maybe you'd have to travel now to my 12. If you're not doing that before, you're doing that now. You know, things like that for people to just encourage or to navigate the
strategies for survival.
Exactly.
All right, Dumebi, thank you so much. Dumebi Oluwole, Senior Associate with Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the story is not far away. We're still around tariffs, heading to the global space now to see, of course, if we could have that slide again, where we, some of the highlights of President Trump's Liberation Day announcement. So it's 10% tariff on all U.S. imports imposed and against some select countries, equivalent to about half of the duties that they charge on the U.S. China is the worst hit, with a total of U.S. tariff against that country amounting to about 54%. European Union will also be subjected to theirs. Theirs is about 20%, while Taiwan, Switzerland, Thailand, Bangladesh will face between 30% and 50% tariffs. The tariffs will take effect over the next few weeks, over the next week. Imports of copper, lumber, gold, pharmaceuticals, and some critical minerals will be exempt from the tariff. Well, at least pharmaceuticals, good for everyone. Trump's 25% duties on automobiles will also take effect next week. And as you would expect, reactions have been pouring in. Let's see China. China's Ministry of Commerce is urging the U.S. to immediately cancel these unilateral tariff measures, and they vow to take resolute countermeasures to safeguard the rights and interests as the U.S. President Donald Trump announced what analysts have described as the steepest tariff hikes in a century. That's 100 years. The Chinese official describes the Trump administration's decision to impose reciprocal tariffs as a typical unilateral bullying practice. That's from China, adding that many countries have expressed strong dissatisfaction and clear opposition to this. Of course, the statement comes after that announcement by President Donald Trump. Also, more reactions now. Spain, they say that they are prepared to take action and protect their companies and consumers from the impact of the sweeping tariffs freshly announced by U.S. President on the minister there, the Spanish economy minister, says that Madrid remains eager to negotiate with the White House, but they are criticizing the new U.S. measures, which involve 20% tariff against the European Union, to which Spain is a member. They call it unfair and unjustified. Still from the EU is in France. The French government has slammed U.S. President Donald Trump with one of officials saying that it's a slew of fresh tariffs reflected an imperialist posture towards the rest of the world. Or Trump, they say, is looking at the world as if he's the master of the world. Well, of course, they are also looking for measures to protect the economy, talking about France. And in the UK, I think the UK has 10%. The UK government says it will keep pushing for a deal to avoid a trade war after that announcement from President Donald Trump. The UK, we know, has spent weeks working on a trade deal with the US to avoid the full impact of the level of tariffs introduced on countries such as Canada and China. Talking about the UK, we have Juliana joining us now to tell us what the mood is like the day after Liberation Day. Juliana, good morning. What's the mood like after this huge announcement that President Donald Trump made yesterday?
Good morning, Eni. I think you've really spelled it out just now, actually. I think the mood is low, isn't it? It depends on the camp that you're in, but I think most people have woken up pretty shocked and very, very disappointed. In fact, you mentioned some reactions from Europe, and I think that's all been summarized by the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who is actually at a conference, I think somewhere in Asia, but she stepped out to give a press statement basically saying that there is going to be a retaliatory tariffs. And I think most people are expecting this really to hit US consumers. Of course, this is going to have massive ramifications on the global economy, which was already struggling because of years of war and the effect of the COVID pandemic. Nobody wanted this, but the MAGA camp, and that's exactly who Donald Trump was speaking to yesterday, very much playing to his audience in the Rose Garden. Most of the people in the top two lines of the front rows were the advisors advising him to do this. And we've already seen this morning the reaction. All stock indices are down, Asian equities lower, FTSE 100, the SAC 40, the DAX, all lower this morning. But of course, there are particular sectors that are getting hit the hardest, particularly clothing. And clothing and loungewear, leisurewear has done so well, Eni. In fact, it's almost been the bellwether of high streets across the West because a lot of people that were staying at home lounging in, tracksuits and hoodies and leggings that were made in Vietnam and China, places that are, as you have quite rightly said, getting the full brunt of these levies. But just bringing it back to the UK, we have had an emergency meeting this morning. I know business leaders were called into Downing Street. There was some sort of televised address. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, looking very serious, basically conceding for the first time that these tariffs are going to impact the British economy. We all knew that. And I think that's why Rachel Reeves's fiscal statement a couple of weeks ago was such an important fiscal event, because we knew that these were coming. I think some commentators on the airwaves have said that, Britain relatively have come out relatively harm-free from these tariffs. It's a universal 10% baseline. We've fallen into that baseline. I think tariffs at the moment are currently about 2.5%. So that is a 7.5% increase, which is massive. But then if you look at, rates in China and EU of up to 54%, I don't think we can complain too much. However, of course, national security, national economic security is important for any good leader. So now I think it's time to, get round the table and see what the response is going to be. Are we going to be as tough as Ursula von der Leyen, or are we going to still play this delicate diplomatic dance, which we've been doing since he was sworn in January?
Yeah, well, I think that's what we'll see in the coming days. Another thing to see, we heard President Macron saying that they're going to meet with the business community and find ways to create buffer for those companies and businesses. Is there any such conversation going on in the UK, have you heard?
It is going on in the UK. So this morning, that's exactly what Sir Keir Starmer was doing. He was speaking to business leaders. And we have heard from the community, particularly steel and small to medium-sized businesses over the past couple of weeks. We've got a lot of very strong, very impressionable lobby groups here in the UK, including the Confederation of British Industry. So we're definitely going to be expecting more sound bites from them over the next couple of days. But quite interestingly, what Sir Keir Starmer said today around that cabinet table is that Britain, one of its main strengths as a nation, is keeping a cool head and long vision. So I think you will see less sort of outlandish, aggressive remarks from Britain, because that's just that's not the British way, and that's certainly not the way Sir Keir Starmer wants to tackle this. I think he's had plenty of opportunity to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and he hasn't done that, and it's worked in his favour thus far. However, you know, we are already going in, we're struggling economically, and this is going to make Britain poorer. So he said he's going to work in the nation's best interest. So we're going to wait and see what happens. I think the tariffs are triggered on the 5th of April, which is Saturday. So there is still time. We know in Trump's world, 24 hours is a very long time. So let's see if any negotiations can be done at breakneck speed.
Yes, Juliana, in Trump's time, 24 hours is a long time. And yes, it's the Trump world we're living in at this time, fortunately or unfortunately. So we'll see what happens in the coming days, especially as you have noted, before Saturday. Anything can happen. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Thanks, Zinni.
All right, Juliana. So, well, Juliana did mention Vietnam there. Retailers and brands seem to be turning to Vietnam to manufacture goods, from sneakers to couches, while moving some or all production out of China. And for years, China's southern neighbor became a popular alternative for companies trying to avoid the crossfire of U.S. trade tensions with Beijing. Now, as President Trump expands his tariff targets, they can no longer steer clear. So bad for China, good for Vietnam. And Trump has said he will put a 46% duty on imports from Vietnam. So President Trump is not blind to that as part of a new wave of global levies that was announced yesterday. And that could soon raise costs for major corporations in apparel, furniture, toy, and other consumer goods. China exported more goods to the United States than any other country for more than 2 decades. But Mexico surpassed China as a top source in 2023. So China now the second largest supplier to the U.S., and they had about $438.9 billion worth of goods supplied to the U.S. in 2024. That, of course, is drastically threatened with all of this. Well, a bit away from tariff now, an Indian court is due to hear a lawsuit filed by Elon Musk's social media company X, accusing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government of misusing the law to censor content on its platform. Last month, X sued the government, saying a new website, Say Young, launched by the Federal Home Ministry last year, was being used to expand its censorship powers and take down content from X. And American multinational tech giant Amazon has made a last-minute bid to acquire TikTok as a U.S. ban on the popular social media platform is set to take effect on Saturday. The move comes after the Biden administration upheld a law requiring TikTok's Chinese-owned parent company, ByteDance, to either divest from app's U.S. operations or face a nationwide ban. The revelation of Amazon's bid coincides with a scheduled meeting between the U.S. President Donald Trump and senior officials to discuss the looming deadline for TikTok's sale. And apart from Amazon, several potential buyers such as Oracle and Blackstone have also emerged in recent months in a bid to acquire the social media firm. Meanwhile, it remains unclear whether ByteDance is willing to sell TikTok or not. Remember that President Trump had also said if TikTok will get sold to a U.S. company, then they might be able to escape some of the tariff that's hanging in the air. That's it on Business Morning today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'll be back for Business Incorporated at 1 p.m. I'm sure we get updates and more reactions to the tariff and all the trending issues. That's what we'll do at 1 p.m. I'll be here with Anita Edit. See you later.